Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi Robert Barr, and I'm pleased that you're joining me and each other for this Shabbat service. It's an opportunity for us to step out of our daily routines, to help us cope with the chaotic times that we're living in, to help us to get in touch with and remember our deeply held values and our beliefs. So put away the pencil and the paper, put away the notebook and the keys, set aside the shovel and hammer, rest. For this interval, no buying, no selling, no working, no laboring, no straining, not living in the past, not planning for the future. This is a time for celebration, for joy, for mirth. We are here alive to rejoice in another Sabbath, another opportunity to be together, grateful for our family and our friends. With no distractions, we touch and are touched, the great gift of the Sabbath. Again, I'm Rabbi Robert Barr of Congregation Beth Adam, our bricks and mortar congregation, and our Jewish community, our online congregation. They're two sides of the same coin. But we've been streaming services for over 10 years. And when we began, we did so because we recognized that there was an opportunity to connect people around the world who wanted to be a part of something larger than themselves, that found the voice of Judaism that we give expression to at Congregation Beth Adam meaningful. Technology has become ever more important because of the pandemic. Streaming services allowed all of us, whether we both live in Greater Cincinnati or we live in other parts of the country or the world, to come together. Social distancing has meant that we haven't had services at Beth Adam since March. But it's also that voice of Judaism that's so important. While we value what our ancestors did, we recognize that we are different. We've been informed by history. We have new information they didn't have access to. We have been shaped by new ideas that they didn't have encounters with. So for us to use the words that they wrote and to think that the ideas and philosophies that they articulated would continue to speak to us today makes no sense. We need to create a new Judaism, a Judaism that's relevant to who we are and the information we had, a Judaism informed by these new ideas. That's what we've been doing here at Congregation Beth Adam. So our liturgy is different than anything you may have encountered anywhere else because we wrote it with these values in mind. So I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're able to share this Shabbat with all of us together. Leave a note. Let us know where you're participating from. Remember, you can chat with one another on whatever platform you're on. We have 2 Facebook pages and a website. And if you're chatting, be welcoming and let each other know that this is a place where we come together as a community, that we're part of something larger than ourselves. And I understand that many people do not necessarily watch our services in real time. Lots of people can't find that Friday nights at 6 o'clock Eastern time just isn't when they are available to participate. We're here whenever you want to participate. That's the beauty of an online congregation. So I'm glad you're here. And we're going to continue our service with the lighting of the Shabbat candles. On this Sabbath, we create our moment in time. We pause, reflect upon our yesterdays and tomorrows, to renew our ties with family and friends, to restore our energies, to refresh our spirits. As the sun descends and shadows lengthen, it's time for us to see not with our eyes, but with our hearts and minds. As the day gives way to evening, it is time for us to welcome the Sabbath. The candles stand before us, waiting to be lit. We recall our ancestors as we too seek to dispel the darkness and banish the cold, to bring glowing softness, warmth, and safety into our homes. May the dancing flames of these candles kindle warmth within our hearts, wisdom in our minds, passion in our souls. Baruch ha'or ba'olam, blessed is the light within the world. Baruch ha'or ba'adam, blessed is the light within each person. Baruch ha'or ba'Shabbat, blessed is the light of the Sabbath. I'm pleased that Dr. Jonathan Levy of Miami University, the director of their program on environment and sustainability, was able to have a conversation with me about climate change, COVID, and how they're intersections. The one thing I need to forewarn you is at the very end of our conversation, as it was drawing to a close, my camera stopped working. So you'll see Dr. Levy, but you won't see me. But you can listen. It's about 90 seconds, a little bit less, as he was drawing his conclusions together. I didn't want to miss that part of the conversation. So that's the only technical glitch. That's part of being on Zoom, part of being on streaming services. So I hope you enjoy, even with that technological glitch, my conversation with Dr. Jonathan Levy. I'm pleased that Dr. Jonathan Levy is joining us this evening to have a conversation about sustainability, the environment, climate change, and social justice, those things together. For those of you who don't know Jonathan, some of you are members of Beth Adam and know Jonathan because he's taught adult education classes, one of the most popular being H2OI. It was fascinating.
That was my wife's, Carol's idea. Yeah.
I thought that was a great. So thank you. You are the director of the Institute for the Environment and Sustainability at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, yes. And a professor there of what? I'm sorry, I keep going. Tell me the.
Yeah, hydrogeology. So
hydrogeology. I couldn't put it together all of a sudden.
Groundwater. I do groundwater hydrology. Groundwater.
Okay. So you do groundwater hydro. How did you become involved in sort of this big environment and sustainability and the social justice out of, because when I hear that, I go, those things don't necessarily go together.
Well, that's interesting. For my PhD, I was at University of Wisconsin in Madison, and I did a very interesting project looking at the occurrence, the distribution, the fate of atrazine in groundwater in a farming community just north of Madison.
And what is atrazine?
Atrazine. Atrazine is an herbicide. It's the most widely applied herbicide in the United States. It's applied on corn. It's applied on soybeans also. It might also be soybeans. So it's applied widely, and it still is. This was in the my PhD. It was in the late 1880s.
Jonathan, you're old. You're not that old.
Late 1980s, early 1990s.
I think it's for the pandemic. We're all lost track of time. That's what it was.
And my students wouldn't bat an eye if I said I was working in the 1880s, I think. And atrazine was a hot topic then, and there was a lot of, it was churning up in groundwater. It was identified as a possible carcinogen, and had a lot of people scared, but also farmers very dependent on it. Farmers who had switched to atrazine from other compounds that really caused much greater problem as far as acute toxicity and danger to the person applying the compound. Atrazine is relatively low toxicity, but it does dissolve to some extent, and it gets deep into groundwater systems over time. And then the big controversy had to do about how you handle that. So the limit actually by the US EPA is 3 parts per billion, which is not, it's a tiny amount of atrazine, but that's the limit. And if you're going over that, do you start penalizing farmers? Do you ban the chemical? And it has all kinds of economic implications. So it was a huge topic. But after finishing my PhD, my wife, Carol Katz, and I went on a trip around the world. We went to Nepal, we went to Thailand, India, Hong Kong, but the main part of it was Nepal, India, and Thailand. And my awareness was raised as to the idea that there were really severe water quality issues that were killing people in large numbers, and not the same as worrying about the chance of getting cancer when exposed to a tiny amount of atrazine in your drinking water for a period of 70 years. So I did start to shift focus a bit. I mean, look, atrazine is still important, and the idea that we're exposed to carcinogens is still important. It's just that in addition, worldwide, there are, the biggest killer, the biggest the contaminant in drinking water that kills the most people is parasites, is bacteria and protozoa and viruses, and it's mainly kids dying of dysentery, kids who are under the age of 5, and we're still at 2,000 to 3,000 kids dying every day.
Worldwide, this is
it's still a huge issue. So my point is, I just started getting interested in sort of a broader view of things, which also took me to doing research in Africa. As you know, I bring students to Zambia, not every year, but every 2 or 3 years. And we team up with people in Zambia, people at the University of Zambia, people in the Water Management Authority in Zambia, people at the Zambia Environmental Management Agency. And we've been doing various studies that hopefully will help give more insight into the issues there. I'm working on a couple papers right now that are in revision, trying to get them published based on the Zambia work. Right. So a quick overview of how I went from being very focused on something of great concern in the U.S. to something a little more global.
And now you're sort of coming back into the U.S. to a degree, doing in the Institute for Environment and Sustainability at Miami, working with students and talking about sustainability and social justice with them.
Yeah, but the social justice issues, it seems to me there's sort of 2 main prongs to that. And one is social justice within the United States. Environmental problems are far from being equally distributed across different ethnic, racial, socioeconomic groups in the United States, but then also globally. There's it's a huge issue globally, and that's becoming especially apparent with climate change now. And for that matter, both issues are becoming all the more apparent and urgent, I think, with the confluence of environmental problems that we've been worried about for a long time, and the confluence of those with climate change and COVID. And those 3 things are all coming together. And for that matter, Black Lives Matter, COVID, climate change, those things, there is a confluence of all 3 of those things.
So could you first talk a little bit about sort of the worldwide, why you see it, or how you see that confluence, and then we want to spend more time talking about how we see it, how you see it, the confluence here in the United States. But I wanted a little bit about worldwide.
There are so many examples, but just to pick a very obvious one that's been going on in the past month. There's been severe flooding going on in Bangladesh, and actually it's pretty widespread through South Asia. But if we just look, Bangladesh is a country. It's I don't know. Actually, I'm not sure if it's a low income or low to middle income country. These are different classifications by the UN, but it's one of those. And Bangladesh has always had a terrible problem with flooding. It's a huge part of the country is the delta of the Ganges River, and therefore much of the country is right at sea level. And you have huge, dense populations living right at sea level. So during storm season, storm surges affect a lot of people. But this current flooding is not a storm surge associated flooding. It's flooding associated with monsoon rains. And this is a long-standing problem in Bangladesh. But these rains, apparently this year, are record rains. You can never say for sure, of course, whether any one year's rains are because of climate change, but you look at the long record of things happening all over and you go, yeah, there is a climate change factor here. And Bangladeshis are being affected. I was just watching a video before our interview, a man saying that the water level, his fields are in deep trouble, literally. His livestock are in trouble. The water level is now at the level of their beds in their house. I mean, this is what's going on with again a huge population. And if it is climate change, these people being affected are not the ones who caused the problem. We are the ones who cause the problem.
We being...
We are financially in a position, not that we're not going to suffer. There will be suffering. There already is suffering here in the United States, and there will be more. But the people who really suffer are the people in vulnerable communities to begin with. And worldwide, globally, those are the communities of people who have not had the biggest carbon footprints.
Mm-hmm.
Bangladesh is it's in the top 5 or 6 most populous countries in the world. But if you look at the per capita carbon footprint, if you look at what an average Bangladeshi is producing, no, there's no way you can say you are responsible for climate change.
But they're suffering as a function of first world economy, first world.
Yes. The most stark example are the islands that are going underwater and actually having to relocate, which is happening. And again, the people living on those islands, these low-lying islands, these are not the biggest carbon emitters in the world.
So the confluence, you're seeing it there. How do you see it in the United States when you put together COVID, climate change?
What really strikes me about COVID, and actually I just found some statistics here. So it turns out, so I just got the statistics. I'll give you my source. It's from a New York Times Magazine article that came out just last week. Each increase in 1 microgram per cubic meter of particulate matter in air. So imagine a microgram, so it's a millionth of a gram of particulate matter. So this is soot. This is something that came from a smokestack or a car exhaust. And it's light enough, it's small enough to be suspended in the air. And these particulates, or these particles, are a hazard to us to breathe in, and they cause health issues. Each increase in 1 microgram per cubic meter of particulate matter results in an 8% increase in death from COVID.
Wow.
So if you live in a place that has high air pollution and has a lot of particulate matter, you are much more likely to actually suffer and die from COVID. And who are the people in the United States that live in areas? It's by far African Americans and Hispanic Americans. I mean, this is the confluence of Black Lives Matter, COVID, and an administration that's constantly trying to relax environmental standards. Mm-hmm. The Trump administration, not to mention cutting funding to the offices in the US EPA that deal with these issues of the fact that environmental harms are not evenly distributed in America, that they much more greatly affect African Americans and Hispanic communities.
And I'm guessing people are thinking, so what's the reason for that? Is that why would people of color be living in places where there's more air pollution? Or
it's because of the history of settlement and redlining that we have in this country. So imagine that you're in a community, and I recommend this article in the New York Times Magazine from August 2nd. It's called The Refinery Next Door, and it focuses on this issue in general, but it focuses on this community in South Philly. And this community in South Philly lives near the, the Philadelphia Energy Solutions Refinery, which I think is an ironic name, considering that this refinery, it's been there for a long time. This area has been associated with production and refinement of petroleum since, I think, the late 1800s. And I do mean the 1800s. So, this refinery has been there. It's been cited a lot for environmental violations, exceeding air pollution standards. And they've been paying a lot of fines. They've paid up to $650,000 in fines over the last couple decades. But the company can pay those fines. What do those fines mean to a company making millions or even billions of dollars? I don't know what this one company makes. But at any rate, you have an African American community living near this refinery. This community was redlined back in the 1940s, 1950s, which means those people can't get loans, they can't get mortgages. So if they start to feel that this is a threat to them, they can't move out.
Right.
They can't sell their homes. They can't get a loan to buy a new home because it's redlined. White people will not be moving in and buying those homes. So this is how, look, redlining, we have a long history in this country of practices that lead to racial segregation.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they lead to racial segregation, especially in areas close to environmental hazards.
Because I think people.
Let me give you a couple statistics.
Okay.
In 2017, there was a report from the NAACP and the Clean Air Task Force that showed that African Americans are 75% more likely to live in what are called Fenceline Communities, which are communities that are situated near facilities that produce hazardous waste.
Hmm.
I mean, that's 2017. It's a dreadful legacy. And it also has to do with when a new refinery, when a new landfill, when an incinerator gets sited, and they do a study, and where does it get put eventually? There are studies that show that these facilities that cause environmental problems, they cause, by the way, environmental problems with soil pollution, air pollution, and water pollution.
Mm-hmm.
And where do they get cited? They get cited in these minority neighborhoods, in minority areas. And the studies show that socioeconomic status is a factor when you look at who's exposed, but it's not as big a factor as race. And to me, that is the really kind of shocking, scary part of this, that it's not just based on who's poor and who has lower income and therefore maybe less able to politically fight against these things. Race is a more important factor than income. Middle class Black neighborhoods have been more affected. I have one statistic here, and then you can ask me a question, but let me give you one more statistic. Let me just find this because I just read this. Okay, a 2008 study done at University of Colorado found that African American families with incomes of $50,000 to $60,000 a year were more likely to live in a polluted neighborhood than white households with incomes less than $10,000.
Yeah. So it's
now, of course, so just to bring this back to COVID, this is a factor in what causes real problems with COVID. Not as, who was the politician who recently said he thinks it's because Black people don't wash?
Oh, that was in Ohio. That was an Ohio legislator who got, yes. Right.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. No.
But so what's happening? The issue is the way. So where we live is where people live will impact their health outcomes if they're living near places where they're likely to be exposed to different kind of pollutants, and then adding to that, COVID exacerbates that already pre-existing problem, and that the studies are showing that systemic racism has helped define all of that.
Yeah.
Now,
both in terms with access to healthcare, but also in terms of exposure to already existing environmental hazards. Yes.
And you're also, because I think for a lot of folks, myself included, I think at the beginning before I started learning more about this through you, through my son, we thought about climate change and sustainability as sort of distributed equally over everybody, that it affects us all sort of similarly. But the reality it really doesn't.
No. And it's interesting. As you know, I've recently been appointed to be co-chair of Miami University's Climate Action Task Force. So we have 3 years to come up with a plan of how Miami University is going to go carbon neutral. But just 3 years. So 3 years, that should be plenty of time.
Yeah, come on. You got to do it.
Yeah, to figure out the world's problems. I could do it in a month. Only I can fix this problem. part of that is we have to also come up with a study of climate change resilience in this area and how we're going to increase our resilience, our community's resilience to climate change. And that kind of broadens our purview out to the community outside of Miami. And I look at Oxford, Ohio, and I'm thinking, well, how are we going to be most affected by climate change? And, you know, there's possibility of some increased flooding. And I have to therefore look at who's going to be most affected by that. But I'm not sure yet, because really I'm just starting this process. But of all the hazards to global warming, the one that I think is actually going to affect us most, and this is kind of funny because it's not the first one that comes to mind, but it's actually the heat. I'm actually most worried about the heat, about the increased number of heat waves in the summer. And when you look at heat waves and you look at who's affected and who dies during heat waves, once again, it comes back to this affects different people differently, and specifically low income. Now in Oxford, we do have a lot of low income residents here in Oxford. I've spent some time working with the Oxford Food Pantry and making deliveries, and I had no idea until I was driving around and delivering groceries the extent, and that's my own ignorance and my own
Right.
Living in my own bubble that I wasn't aware of that. And there is an African American community that's part of that, but for the most part here in Oxford, it's a white community. But when I look at the lower income folks in this area, and I look at where they live, what kind of air conditioning they have, and you think about heat waves in the summer and our ability to cope with those, I think there's some really vulnerable populations whose health is going to actually be quite affected by increased heat in the summer. It already is an issue, but you know, the idea that it goes from 2 weeks in the summer that are really harmful to, Bob, I can't see you anymore. Are we still? Are you there? You're there. You can see me. I'll just keep talking.
I can see you, and I don't know what happened to.
Okay, that's fine then. That's fine.
Talking,
you know, the idea that will go from, and I have to look at the numbers, but you know, 2 weeks of being really vulnerable to extreme heat in the summer to 4 weeks or 5 weeks, and the ability to keep those air conditioners going, and also think about the different types of jobs. My job, I can go from my air-conditioned house to my air-conditioned office, but with climate change, it's going to become harder and harder for people with manual labor jobs, people working outside, to continue that work through the summer. I mean, with just the heat, you start to think about, and then people's health issues being exacerbated by the heat. You start to think about the really vulnerable communities, even in this area. And I don't know that we're going to expand this work. I bet through the research that this task force will generate, looking at climate, there will be people looking at communities in Hamilton, communities in Middletown, that are also going to be the most vulnerable to climate change here in this area.
Okay, well, I appreciate it. I'm sorry you can't see me. I don't know what just happened, but Zoom has worked very well most of the time. I appreciate you taking the time, and I appreciate you helping us to think about the issue of how social justice and climate change and COVID are intersected. So, Jonathan, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Welcome.
You take care. Stay healthy.
Okay, you too. Thanks.
I'm glad you watched the entire conversation that I had with Dr. Jonathan Levy. I thought what he was sharing with us was so important. I didn't want to end our conversation abruptly when my camera stopped working, or not allow you to hear the rest of what he had to say. What he said was disturbing. And now that we have that information, each of us has the opportunity to determine how we can act to right the wrongs that he was describing. We continue now with the sharing of the virtual challah, a symbolic act that says that though we are in our separate places, we are connected one to another. As the fingers of the challah intertwine, so do we join hands in our common humanity, sharing the fruits of our labor. We cherish that which has been created through human effort, for it is through the work of our hands, the strength of the human spirit, the vision of our that our dreams are woven into the tapestry of time. We celebrate the accomplishments yesterday and today, anticipating the possibilities of tomorrow. May the sharing of the challah strengthen our bonds with others who walk upon this earth. Baruch Hamal Kapenu, blessed is the work of our hands. Baruch Hazon Ha'adam, blessed is the vision of our minds. Baruch Lechem Ha'aretz, blessed is the bread of the earth. And then if you have some juice or some wine, join with me. We celebrate the fruit of the vine and the bounty of nature as we lift the cup and sip from it. For we're part of nature, which gave us birth and continues to sustain us. Even as we depend upon nature, so do we influence its course. Through the search for understanding, we have gained the knowledge to shape our world. Guided by the best of human wisdom, the compassion of our spirit, we accept the responsibility which rests upon us. May the taste of the wine or juice upon our lips stir within us a reverence for nature and a respect for human endeavor. Ruchim chachayim ba'olam. Blessed is the life within the world. Ruchim chachayim ba'adam. Blessed is the life within us. And so we say, l'chaim, to life. So I'm glad we had this opportunity to share this service together. I invite you to go to bethadam.org, our website, and there listen to my podcasts, explore the materials that we have posted there, learn more about Beth Adam and the bold voice of Judaism that we give expression to at Beth Adam and at ourjewishcommunity.org. I hope that you join me next week for this Shabbat service, and we close with the words that we close with each week. May we know blessings those who are near. May we know blessings those who are far. And may the Sabbath bring its goodness to everyone soon, wherever they are. Shabbat Shalom.